Hey guys, today I'm going to do an Irish Taoiseach tier list. For those who don't know, the Irish Taoiseach is a term for the Irish Prime Minister. And throughout our history, we've had 15, if you include W.T Cosgrave from the Irish Free State, which I will for this video. Um, and so my criteria for this is just simply, did they leave the country in a better place than they found it? Obviously, that's going to be shaped by my political opinions too. But I will try to be as neutral as possible in appraising them. So, without further ado, let's get started. So yeah, the first Taoiseach of the Irish Free State was W.T Cosgrave. Where do we have him? Oh, here he is. So he inherited. First off, he was Taoiseach of Clan na Gael, which was a precursor to Fine Gael, and he inherited a pretty unstable government. Um, I mean, that's an understatement. Ireland was immediately launched into a civil war following partition and the acceptance of the treaty, 1921. And the first few years of his governance was basically just trying to get the state to survive. And that included um, pretty brutal executions of people who were thought to be related to the other side of the Civil War. And he actually brought in executions without trial. He executed 77 men. And of course, execution without trial is just killing them, really, isn't it? So, pretty barbaric stuff there. Um, that's definitely been a stain in his record. And I'll definitely, I mean, in my opinion, it's the worst thing he ever did. Um, Other than that, he ruled from until 1932, and Ireland during that time was very poor. There was minimal development, although they did create some hydroelectric dams, I think, out west. But the country was really just getting on its 2 feet. It wasn't really independent. It was a dominion of the British Empire. So Cosgrave's hands were pretty tied, and Ireland was pretty tied to Britain. So there is a limited amount of independence for sure. But probably the best thing W.T. Cosgrave did was hand over power peacefully in 1932, which sounds like a low bar, but you got to remember Fianna Fáil were coming in, and they'd won the election, and they were obviously from the opposite side of the Civil War, and there was talks in the government and in the army about doing a coup to prevent them from getting in. And it's kind of hard to imagine, but in the 1930s, it was pretty common throughout Europe. I mean, you got to remember the rise of authoritarianism. But W.T. Cosgrave had no interest in it, and instead he handed over government peacefully to his enemies, and that kind of ensured Irish democracy would continue, and it has for 100 years now. So definitely a very important legacy there. All in all, though, I think he was again quite limited in what he could do for the full decade, really. I don't blame him too much for kind of the minimal development and poverty of the 20s. I think that would have happened no matter who got in. Um, you could maybe say that for the executions too, but I think executing your own citizens without trial is just one of the worst things a leader can do, you know? So for that reason, I'll probably give him a C for me, in that he kept the country intact and he ensured that a coup wouldn't happen. The military would be under civilian control because there was an army mutiny in the 1920s. And so for the long term, I think he did have a positive impact. But again, the execution, so he couldn't be higher than C for me. Next up, we have Éamon de Valera. Here he is. He was one of the Fianna Fáilers that got elected in 1932, and he became Taoiseach, I think, 4 times in total, and he also became president twice. So he really dominated Irish politics for decades. I mean, it's kind of incredible. And he managed to dismantle the Free State that Ireland was, because again, we were British Dominion. We weren't an independent nation. He drafted a new constitution, 1937 or 38. And he's the guy who began to use the term Taoiseach, by the way, in his second term. So he also managed to keep Irish independence, at least in a limited way, during World War II by having a neutral kind of facade, but also helping Britain for most things that they asked for. He kind of kept Ireland out of the war, but gave Britain what they wanted the majority of the time, or them not always. So you could say that neutrality was fake, but Ireland managed to get through the war without being invaded, either by Germany or Britain. And long term, I mean, he is the guy who brought us from the Free State to the Republic, although he was not Taoiseach when the Republic was declared in 1949. But that's probably the best thing he did, right? But massive issues with the guy. I mean, first off, he brought us very close to the Catholic Church. I mean, the new constitution was kind of gave Catholicism a very special place legally in the country. And he's blamed for a lot of the kind of theocratic mistakes, I guess. That's how we view it anyway, looking back at the 20th century. I mean, the Magdalene laundries, the mother and baby homes, a lot of those predated Dev, but he certainly didn't help. Things definitely got worse for women in Ireland. And also the child sex abuse of the Catholic Church. I mean, that was a problem even back then. Also, kind of connected with his Catholicism was this kind of belief that development, modernization was wrong, and that Ireland to stay pure had to be Catholic, traditional, agricultural, you name it, which is just a fancy way of saying we need to stay poor. And for that kind of like anti-modernity streak that he had, I mean, that really, I can't stand that. And of course, the Catholic Church links. But I definitely do think he's better than W.T Cosgrave, simply for ending the Irish Free State and kind of beginning the path to actual independence. So I will have to put him higher than that at a B. But I'm not a fan of him. I'm really not. Okay. Number 3, we have John A. Costello of Fine Gael. Where is he? Oh, here he is. Yeah. That's actually an old photo of him. He was Taoiseach, I think, twice. And he led the first inter-party government. So he had a coalition of like 4 parties. So you can imagine how hard that was to keep intact. And during his terms was mostly in the 1950s, but in 1949 he declared Ireland a republic, abolished the monarchy. Thank God. I'm very happy about that. He also got us into the United Nations. He got us UN membership. And there was some development. He continued an electrification scheme that actually Deb started just before he got out of power. He also, with Noel Brown, I think was the Minister for Health, they brought in a great campaign to counter tuberculosis, which had big benefits. And he's also the Taoiseach who said no to NATO. He didn't want us. He decided not to pursue a military alliance, an official one, which I think is probably been good for us long term. But he also oversaw horrific unemployment, a horrific economy, mass immigration. I think 10% of the country left during the 1950s. So can you say the quality of life improved? No, you really can't. The 50s were a very rough time for the country. The best thing you can say he did was declare the Republic, UN membership, and also some decent healthcare related stuff. So for that, I guess I'd put him. I mean, it was kind of a disappointing 50s, really, wasn't it? Should you go with Dev or Costello? I'll put him with Cosgrave, I think. Yeah. Just because the 50s were such a rough time. That actually feels wrong. Fuck it. I'm going to put Cosgrave even lower. Yeah, that seems a lot better. They don't deserve to be on the same level. Costello didn't execute people. Next up, we have the GOAT, Seán Lemass, down here. Where is he? Here. He was Taoiseach of. He came from Fianna Fáil, but he came from a different wing of De Valera, a different wing within the party. He was pro-modernisation, thank God. So he continued electrification. He brought in mandatory secondary schooling. He created the RTE, and he began some amount of industrial development as well. He really put us on our modern path, if you'd like. He was also the Taoiseach who began our EEC membership bid to get us to join the European community. The EU is only around since the 90s, but the precursor to it is the EEC. So he was very pro-European integration, which, I mean, long term has had massive benefits for the country, definitely. And he also did a great thing in Northern Ireland. He kind of thawed relations with them by visiting up north, kind of ending a 40-year diplomatic Cold War, if you'd like, between the North and South. And although nothing really came of it because the Troubles broke out a few years later, I still think it's definitely a positive step. But by breaking with kind of Dev's kind of traditional views, I definitely think he brought Fianna Fáil on a better path, and the country as well. So for me, he's S tier. I'll be honest, easily. Up next, we have Jack Lynch. Jack Lynch, I didn't know too much about him before doing this video. I actually had to read a bit about him. Here he is there. I think he was again Fianna Fáil. And he was Taoiseach in the 70s, mostly during the Troubles. And he oversaw the arms crisis, which was a political crisis where a bunch of Fianna Fáilers tried to sell arms to the IRA. And one member that was thought to be connected was Charles Haughey. And Jack Lynch kind of kicked him to the back of the party as punishment, and then kind of brought him back in his later years. And that ended up with Haughey getting control of the party and becoming Taoiseach himself. And we'll get to Haughey, but terrible guy. So he definitely handled Haughey the wrong way, which is definitely a stain. One of the good things that he did was he got us EEC membership. He continued the bid after Lemass, and in 1973 we joined it. Great thing for Ireland again. But he also brought in a lot of modern welfare state reforms. So he brought in retirement pensions, welfare for women, maternity insurance, free secondary education, and free transport for pensioners. So a lot of like the modern care that the government's expected to take part in started with Jack Lynch, which is definitely a positive. I mean, I like that sort of thing, that the sort of policies that actually affect quality of life immediately, But the big blot in his record is definitely the arms crisis, and he gets a lot of criticisms from Republicans for not doing enough for nationalists in the North during the Troubles, and like that's definitely true. But his hands were pretty tied with our relationship with Britain. We were still very dependent on them. So I think any Taoiseach at that time would have kind of neglected nationalists in the North, no matter what, unfortunately. That's definitely, I mean, there's a lot of criticism for how he handled the Troubles at the beginning of it. But for EEC membership and for the welfare state improvements, I think he's better than average in his kind of like legacy, I guess, if you want to say that. So I'll actually give him. Does he belong on the same level as Dev? I guess I'll give him an A just for the EEC and the welfare state stuff. I think definitely he left the country better off. I think so, anyway. Okay, next up we have Liam Cosgrave. So he's actually W.T Cosgrave's son. He was also from Fine Gael, and he was the longest lived Taoiseach. He died in, I think he's like 97 in the 2010s. And he was the last Taoiseach born before the partition of Ireland, which is pretty interesting. He was kind of a conservative. He voted against legalizing contraception. He was constantly arguing with two of his presidents. He also brought in the Emergency Powers Bill, which curtailed freedom of speech in Ireland because of security issues relating to the Troubles. But it definitely led to a lot of draconian restrictions on civil liberties. There's no doubt about that. He also oversaw a period of particular police brutality with An Garda Síochána, and the economy was shite, worst since the 1950s. However, the only positive thing I can really say about him was that he did grow the welfare state slightly, and he did attempt a tax increase on the wealthy, which didn't work in the end, but worth a shot, I guess. But yeah, look, for being voting against legalizing contraception, the restriction of civil liberties of his citizens, he has to be low for me. Definitely. Maybe I'll put him with his dad, actually. Here he is, yeah. Liam Cosgrave. I'll put him, same level. Thereabouts. I don't have that much positive stuff to say about him. Sorry to the two Liam Cosgrave fans in the world. Up next we have Charles Haughey. This guy down here. Now, he is the most controversial Taoiseach, easily, of the 20th century. He was Taoiseach 3 times, and he was controversial because he was heavily, heavily, heavily corrupt. He enriched himself constantly through abusing his power. He appointed several dodgy figures to surround himself with in cabinet. He spied on the opposition. He recorded journalists' phone calls. He ruled Fianna Fáil party through fear and intimidation. I could go on and on about just how ridiculously corrupt this guy was, but to give you a hint, in the late 1980s, Brian Lenihan, a senior Fianna Fáil minister, became sick with liver disease. By 1989, he was gravely ill. He needed a transplant, and it was likely to cost up to £200,000. At Haughey's behest, the money for Lenihan's operation was soon collected from businessmen sympathetic to Fianna Fáil. However, it later emerged that more than half of Lenihan's fund ended up in Haughey's own accounts. He took £100,000 from his friends' cancer donations and kept it in his bank account. So that's like tip of the iceberg with Haughey. Comically corrupt man. And he hoarded out the office. I mean, just completely. For that alone, he needs to be nearly at the bottom of the list. The only positive thing you can really say about him is that he created what was called the Irish Financial Services Centre, the IFSC, to help attract foreign investment into Ireland. And this contributed to a solid foundation for Ireland's economic growth, which really took off in the 1990s. That's it. That's pretty much the only good thing this guy did that I'm willing to give him. But for whoring out the office to such an extent, man, and just 3 terms as Taoiseach, just over and over and over again. I mean, you read some of the stuff he said, some of his speeches, he really kind of sounds Trumpian. I mean, he has a quote, because he was in so long, right? That he has a quote. Let me see if I can find it. In the September 1991 interview, Haughey joked about staying on as Taoiseach, saying, quote, "Some of these Chinese leaders go on until they are 80 or 90, but I think that's probably a bit too long." So, like, definitely Trumpian in a lot of ways. But for the corruption alone, I mean, whoring out the country like that is just, I gotta give him an F. I think he's my number one hate. I'm really not a fan. You can say that the economic stuff that he did was great long term, and it was, but to say that he like single-handedly created the Celtic Tiger or whatever, people overstated, I think. And for whoring out the office to such a fucking extent, not a chance. You have to be at the bottom for that sort of stuff. Next up we have Garret FitzGerald. Where is he? With his glasses here, yeah. He was Taoiseach twice for Fine Gael. And again, his term was dominated by stuff relating to the Troubles. In 1981, you had the hunger strike in Northern Ireland. He was criticised a lot for the harsh treatment of the families of the hunger strikers. I think he refused to meet them, or he had really bad meetings with them, one or the other. But he gets a lot of criticism for that. He also oversaw a period of economic recession, which included harsh cuts to government spending. There was high unemployment. However, the benefits, or the good things he did, he was kind of a liberal as far as Fine Gael went. He attempted liberalisation of the country by opposing abortion to be added into the constitution to protect the life of the mother. So basically, abortion was illegal, but it was going to be added to the constitution that it was illegal, and he opposed that. He attempted to legalize divorce, but failed. And he also liberalized contraception laws. So kind of more, as far as the 80s went, I think he was pretty open-minded on social stuff. Definitely. And he also helped create the Anglo-Irish Agreement of 1985, which people, you couldn't really see it at the time, but looking back, it contributed to the peace process of the 1990s. It brought the Good Friday Agreement a step closer. Definitely a positive. But for the most part, I think he was fairly mid. I mean, the liberalization stuff is definitely a very positive, especially for the time. I wouldn't say the country was too radically changed, though, in any other way. I guess I'd put him up there with Costello. Yeah, I think I'll put him there. I do appreciate his attempts of liberalization, though, definitely. Up next, we have Albert Reynolds. This is another guy I didn't know too much about. He was Taoiseach in the 1990s. His greatest achievement was the peace process in Northern Ireland. He helped achieve an IRA ceasefire in 1994. He supported EU integration, further EU integration. But there's not that much to say about him because he was only in for 2 years. Attempted to, what basically ended his term as Taoiseach was that he attempted to appoint an ally to the courts. The man in question, he was called Harry Whelan, and he was controversial because he had helped prevent, as a lawyer, as a judge, I think, a 14-year-old girl from traveling to the UK for an abortion after being raped. He also, on top of that, did not extradite a rapist priest to Northern Ireland despite the RUC requesting it. Reynolds, despite this, still appointed him to the position, but it collapsed his coalition and he fell as Taoiseach. And Wheelahan ended up resigning after just 2 days. So absolutely crazy political crisis there. If you want to look it up, just 1994 political crisis, Ireland, it'll pop up. But yeah, real fucking own goal there by Albert Reynolds. Definitely below average Taoiseach. Just an avoidable scandal, really. I mean, Jesus Christ. By the way, that I think Judge Harry Whelan in question, he's still alive. He's still kicking. It really wasn't that long ago, the 90s, you know. Up next we have John Bruton. John Bruton helped further the peace process during the years 1994 to 1997. However, there were allegations of corruption against his government, but I don't think him himself. But it ended up with his Minister of Transport, Michael Lowry, resigning and being kicked out of the party. Michael Lowry is still an independent TD, by the way. He just ran independently after that and has ever since. John Bruton, he was from the Conservative wing of Fine Gael, but he did support the legalisation of divorce, which happened in the 90s. He was also, oddly enough, a mild unionist. He kind of labelled himself as a Redmanite, like a constitutional nationalist. Criticised the Easter Rising a lot, especially during the centenary, but obviously he's in retirement now. Kind of odd, but I guess for the time, you know, the peace process was about, it kind of makes sense that he was looking back at history with a sort of Redmanite view. It kind of makes sense for the period. I don't really know. Kind of weird though. Not the sort of opinions I want from my Taoiseach, please. Where is he? I think it's him. He looks really kind of like Bertie Ahern. It's kind of hard. Where should I put him? I'll put him C as well. Just for the peace process. Oh, and I forgot, he also oversaw the Irish presidency of the European Union in the 90s, which helped lay the groundwork for the Eurozone. So definitely had an effect there. But yeah, for the most part, just really mid. And the Redmanite stuff is just weird to me, but each to their own. Next up, we have Bertie Ahern. Here he is, the big fella. He gets a lot of credit for the peace process, which was signed in 1998, and he definitely deserves a lot for that. I mean, peace in Northern Ireland after 30 years is a really big deal. He oversaw also the Celtic Tiger, which was a period of economic growth in Ireland that brought more wealth into the country than you can even imagine. But this came crashing to a halt in 2008 after the financial crisis, which started in America. It really screwed Ireland because of our financial system, the way it was working. There was a lot, basically, the banking sector and all that, and the government were kind of hand in hand. There wasn't really a separation of power there in a lot of ways. And what ended up happening was that all the banks went under, and Bertie Ahern and the next Taoiseach, Brian Cowen, had to bail them out. But it led to, I mean, national humiliation, I think is the only way to say it. After 2008, people were very angry. And to make it even worse, Bertie Ahern, it came out that he had been taking money, bribes, pretty much, not his whole life, but for a lot of his career. They were known as brown envelopes. And famously, there was a tribunal into it. And Bertie Ahern, they asked for his bank account details so that they could see how much money he had. And he famously said, "Oh, I don't have a bank account." So you can imagine, like, that lie is just insane to say. Insane. But yeah, whoring out the office. It's the worst thing a leader can do, to whore out his country like that. And I mean, his saving grace is the peace process. A lot of people give him a lot of credit for that, especially the older voters who remember it. But that's not enough to overlook that extent of corruption, you know. And you know, he was also asleep at the wheel in the build up to the financial crisis. A lot of these banks needed government oversight. He did not provide that. He was friends with a lot of the bankers, probably part of the reason. And he also took bribes. So, no, Jesus, no. I think he's the worst sort of like corrupt politician. I mean, he really has that aura about him, if you want to say it like that. So for that reason, I have to put him down in an F with Haughey. I mean, corruption goes together, I think. All right, next up we have the most hated Taoiseach of the modern era, which is, of course, Brian Cowen. Now, this guy inherited the worst economy possible. I mean, unemployment was at, I think it reached 19%, worst financial crisis Ireland's ever experienced. And he brought in harsh austerity measures to correct it. And they were deeply unpopular, as was his handling of the banks, which he bailed out. And he also had to seek a bailout for Ireland from the IMF, the EU, and the United Kingdom. And it's not an over exaggeration to say that that was a national humiliation. People were so angry with this guy. I mean, the visceral hatred from him, I'd say it's still palpable. I mean, if you bring up his name to people. And he was so hated that he even failed to get the Treaty of Lisbon ratified, which was an EU treaty that we had to vote on. And it failed. And it failed in part because people were just so angry with this government. I mean, there was Euroscepticism involved too, for sure. But he ended up having to go back, get it revised, and then we had to vote on it a second time, and then it passed. But it humiliated him. It damaged our relationship with the EU. And just total mess. And by the time he left office, he had an 8% approval rating. So not 18, not 80, but 8, which is the lowest since records began to be kept for approval ratings. So given all that, it's kind of a miracle that he lasted 3 years as Taoiseach. I can't think of a positive thing I can say about him. I mean, if you guys know one, maybe let me know, but he's definitely F tier. I mean, he doesn't have a saving grace that I know of. I mean, Ahern has GFA and Haughey has the IFSC. I can't think of anything for Brian Cowen. I really, really can't. The best thing you can say about him is that it was an impossible time to be Taoiseach. But even then, nah, screw him. He's an F. Next up, we have Enda Kenny, this man right here. He was a Fine Gael Taoiseach, and he came in after Brian Cowen. His tenure saw the reconstruction of the Irish economy, and he was pretty successful at it. When he got into office, unemployment was 19%, and when he left, it was 6%. By the time he took office, we had the worst financial crisis in Europe. And when he left, we had the fastest growing economy of Europe. So pretty successful, all things considered. He managed to pay back the 2008 related loans Ireland was wedged in, and he came from the more liberal wing of the Fine Gael party. He helped legalize gay marriage and later abortion, and he paid out money to victims of the laundries. And his liberal streak goes back a really long time. I think if you go back to the 80s, he was even campaigning for the legalization of marriage in like rural Mayo, where he's from, which must have been a tough sell. But yeah, he does seem to really be genuine in his kind of liberal streak for a really long time. Brought us further away from the church, which I always like. I also like that he's pretty mild mannered, didn't have too many scandals, especially compared to his predecessors. And he also brought in citizen assemblies, which are kind of like these additional places where the governments, if they have an issue that they have to tackle, they bring in 100 people from the public who are consulted, and then they make a suggestion on how to tackle the problem. They're non-binding, I think, but the government usually implements some of the suggestions, but they can dodge the big ones if they want to. So it can be kind of underwhelming, but I think it's a nice addition to a liberal democracy, I think, to have citizen assemblies. So I do like that too. The negatives are, of course, the austerity measures, some of which have not been replaced. There's been funding cuts that just never came back, even when our economy started to boom again. And also financialization of housing. That definitely happened under him and before. He didn't build any social housing, not really. So the origins of the housing crisis is definitely part of his legacy too. Although he's not associated with it too much. It's mostly Varadkar, because it didn't get bad until the later 2010s. So, but that's definitely something to consider about him. But overall, if you're judging Taoiseachs from how the country was when they got into office and how the country was when they left, I think Enda Kenny had the biggest improvement, I think, out of any of them. So for that reason, I'm going to have to give him an S tier, even though I don't really like Fine Gael usually. I think he was definitely the best Fine Gael Taoiseach of all time. You can maybe say it's a low bar, but there you go. So next up, we'll probably do them together because they were kind of rotating Taoiseachs for a while. But you have Leo Varadkar on the left and Micheál Martin on the right. Micheál Martin is a Cork TD, leader of Fianna Fáil. Varadkar was a Dublin TD and leader of Fine Gael. Their era has kind of been dominated by Repeal the Eighth for Leo Varadkar, delegalisation of abortion, and then Brexit and COVID, both those crises. I think Leo Varadkar did pretty well in managing them both. So did Micheál Martin. Especially Brexit. COVID, they definitely messed up a couple of times and you had some scandals. But I think if you compare us to like the average in Europe, I think we did okay, COVID-wise. But the housing crisis seems to have just gotten worse. I mean, they've completely failed to tackle that. It's a massive stain. It's affecting hundreds of thousands of people in the country. You have a generation now who will never own a home. They'll just rent for life, or live with their parents for life. It's a record number homeless. Just, that's a huge stain. I mean, gigantic. I think if C is mid tier, I guess I would put them both about there. I don't think they're some of the worst Taoiseachs we've ever had. I don't think they're comparable to these guys. And I think these guys, possibly the Cosgraves and Reynolds, but they've both been pretty successful as Taoiseachs and as leaders of their parties. I mean, Micheál Martin's managed to get Fianna Fáil to become the biggest party again in the Dáil. He's led the party for over 10 years. He's a pretty sly politician, all things considered, and he's very mild and kind of oatmeal type personality. Kind of makes him hard to like, but hard to hate as well a little bit, I think. But I don't think they've significantly improved the country. I don't think they've significantly made it worse, except for housing. I would put them very mid. I wouldn't think highly of them at all, to be honest. Just okay, like maybe if C is a 5 out of 10 or something. I put it at about 6 out of 10 maybe. There's one other Taoiseach that's not on the list named Simon Harris. Now, Simon Harris only served for 8 months last year was it this year? It was this year, as Taoiseach. And he was for Fine Gael after Leo Varadkar resigned. And so for 8 months, he's not even on this list here. And I honestly don't know if it's fair to judge someone on 8 months. But if I had to, I'd probably put him below Micheál Martin and Varadkar. I think he's very uninspiring, awkward, weird. I can't think of a positive about him, to be honest. So I would probably put him at the D tier. But maybe that's my bias. Maybe he deserves to be at a C if he's only had 8 months, you know. But yeah, he's gone again, and Micheál Martin's in now too, so he's back in as Taoiseach. So I guess we'll see in the future now that Leo's resigned and there's a new wing of Fine Gael in power. There you go. Yeah, that's my list. Just to go over it again, we have S tier Lemass and Enda Kenny, A tier Jack Lynch, B tier Dev, C tier Costello, FitzGerald, Bruton, Leo Martin. D tier, you got the Cosgraves, Albert Reynolds. F tier, you got Haughey, Ahern, Running Cowen. So yeah, let me know what you guys think of that list and what changes you would make. That'd be pretty interesting. I've tried to be as unbiased as I can. Obviously, you know, everyone has a bias when it comes to politics, but I'm not endorsing any of these guys and their parties, if that makes sense. Like, I would have massive disagreements with everyone here. But you got to judge them for the time and the changes that they made, really. So, thanks very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.